Hi friends! Welcome to video number 3. So again, today we will attempt to create a dessert that doesn't use anything fancy, doesn't use mixers or an oven or any special equipment, just plain old bowls and hands and maybe a stovetop or a microwave to complete. So today's recipe is apple crisp. So it's very basic. We just need to kind of stew the apples and sugar and cinnamon and then top it with something crispy to give that added texture. And you can serve it with either whipped cream or vanilla ice cream just to give that contrast in flavor and in temperature and in texture. So I hope you enjoy the process as much as the eating in the end, and we'll get started right away. The ingredients for this recipe include 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of white sugar, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, a pinch of nutmeg. Now nutmeg has a very strong and distinct flavor, so make sure you just put a little bit or none at all if it's not something that you like. We'll also be needing 2 pieces of calamansi and an apple. The apple can be any type that you prefer. And we will be using a teaspoon of cornstarch later on to thicken the sauce. Now for the topping, we will be using 1/4 cup of oatmeal, and this should be whole oats, not the instant kind. 1/4 cup nut of your choice. For today, I'm using walnuts. 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, 1 tablespoon of butter, and 1/2 tablespoon of honey. If you don't have honey, you can also use maple syrup. And then also a pinch of salt. So the first thing we need to do is to squeeze 2 of the calamansi into a bowl of cold water. Now what this does is it delays the oxidation or the browning of the apples while we're cutting it before we put it into our apple crisp. Okay, so once you've peeled the apple, the first thing you do is to cut it into 8. No, and while you're not working on some of the slices, you can put it in the bowl with the calamansi or the lemon. Okay, so what you need to do is per 1/8. Now, after removing the core, which is where all the seeds are, now you can then slice the apples into these pieces. So I prefer them this way, but you could also chop them up in bigger chunks. What that does is it will just take a while longer to cook them, and they are better able to, I guess, keep the flavor of the apple in, you know. So after you finish cutting that, you can just put it back in the bowl with the calamansi and then proceed to your next piece. So do that for all of the pieces of the apple. So after cutting our apples, we'll move to the stove and melt our butter. So once our butter is melted, we will be taking all of our dry ingredients, so the brown sugar, the white sugar, the cinnamon, and the nutmeg, and we'll mix it all together separately from the butter just to make sure that everything is mixed well enough. So we'll mix it together, after which we will add it into the melted butter. After that, we'll mix it together and wait for the sugar to dissolve in the butter. But we won't wait too long because we don't want the sugar to start caramelizing. So once the sugar has dissolved, we will be adding all our chopped apples into the pan. And we'll start mixing the apples and the sugar together. So this will start the cooking process for the apple, and depending on what type of apple you used, the time that it will take to cook will vary. So if you use a green apple, for instance, it might take longer to cook, just because green apples are crunchier. Green apples flavor-wise are also a bit more tart than the other apples, which I personally prefer actually. But today I used Gala apples, and Gala apples will probably take about 5 to 7 minutes to soften and to cook. If you use a red apple, like a Washington apple, it might take a bit quicker. So we're mixing the apples thoroughly with the butter and the sugar mixture to make sure that everything is evenly coated. Now as this cooks, we will actually see the liquid increase as the apples excrete their juices. How long we'll cook this depends on how crispy you want your apples to be in the end. So we'll just wait a bit. We will cover it with a pan cover to hasten the process. So after a few minutes, we can check on the crispiness of the apples, and the best way to do it is to get a piece and then try it. If we are okay with how soft or how crispy it is, then we can move on to the next steps. If not, then we can continue cooking it for a few minutes more. So once we're okay with the softness of the apples, we can start to thicken the sauce. And we do this by taking 1 teaspoon of cornstarch and getting about a tablespoon of the applesauce and mixing it in. This ensures that there won't be lumps of cornstarch once we mix it in with the rest of the liquid. So once the cornstarch has been fully dissolved, we join that with the rest of the liquid. And this will cook pretty quickly, so make sure you're on top of things. So mix everything together, make sure all the apples are coated with the butter and sugar mixture that is quickly thickening, and then remove from heat. So after the apples, we move on to the crisp topping, and we start off by again melting our 1 tablespoon of butter and then adding on our honey, or if you don't have honey on hand, you can also use maple syrup. We'll also then add in our 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. And we'll mix this together until the brown sugar dissolves. So again, we don't want to overcook this because we don't want the sugar to caramelize before we add our other ingredients. Next, we'll add in our oats and our nuts. And we'll mix everything. Make sure that all of the bits and pieces get covered with the sugar and the butter mixture. So we'll keep on cooking this until the whole mixture becomes a golden brown. Now you'll start smelling the nuts roasting, and you'll start smelling the oatmeal cooking. What this does is it caramelizes the sugar, which binds everything together at the same time, gives another layer of crisp or crunch to the whole mixture. So we'll add in a pinch of salt to this one just to give it a bit more flavor. And we'll continue cooking it for a few more minutes. So now we have here our cooked apples and our cooked apple crisp topping, and we'll assemble the dish. So get a bowl or a plate. Put some of the apples at the bottom of your bowl. And top it up with your crisp. You can then top this whole mixture with ice cream or whipped cream. I have some whipped cream left over from a previous project, and so I'm topping mine with some whipped cream. And this just really provides like a break from the sweetness of the apples and the crisp. So here we have it, guys. Our apple crisp with whipped cream topping. Hope you enjoy it.